Hong Kong's new ride-hailing law could raise fares and lengthen waits as platforms face vehicle caps and penalties of up to $1 million under new rules. To discuss this, we have Ryan Ip of the Public Policy Institute. Welcome, Ryan. So, why the change? Why is stricter ride-hailing regulation needed in Hong Kong now?
Well, I think first of all, I think this current gray zone, I think is no longer sustainable. Our legal framework does not have a dedicated regulatory regime for online ride-hailing platforms, even though point-to-point demand has already become very substantial. So regulation is needed to protect safety and also insurance coverage and accountability. The government has repeatedly stressed that vehicles used for paid passenger services must be properly licensed and insured. And without a formal regime covering platforms, drivers, vehicles, there are many gaps in passenger protections, liability allocation, and enforcement. So I think ultimately the regulation is needed not just to control the market, but to really organize it for a better stage. Currently, taxis remain under pressure, but not fully upgraded. While our ride-hailing continues to expand without a stable basis for long-term investment and service integration. So that discourages flat modernization and also weakens the incentive to improve service quality. So I think the importance is to really regulate in a way that supports innovation rather than leaving the sector in a prolonged legal gray area.
But how could these changes affect workforce productivity and daily commuting?
I think the main operational risk is not the regulation itself. It is the transition. If poorly calibrated, that would temporarily reduce legal supply. If compliance costs rise sharply, if licensing is too restrictive, or the transition is too abrupt, the number of legally available drivers and vehicles could fall in the short run. And that would mean longer waiting times, higher fares, and also less reliable point-to-point transport, especially during peak hours and also in areas with weaker public alternatives. So I think for workers and business, the key issue is really on reliability. If the legal supply becomes too tight during the transition, and the likely effects are less predictable journeys, and more pressure at peak hours, and also weaker first and last mile connectivity. And in a high density international city like Hong Kong, the time cost can scale up quickly into an economic cost. Given the existing scale of point-to-point demand, even very modest increase in waiting time can actually translate into a large cumulative loss of working hours across the city. So I think that's why poorly calibrated regulation would not just affect individual passengers. It would also erode Hong Kong's reputation for a efficient urban mobility.
So if you were to make a recommendation, Ryan, what policy adjustments could prevent disruption while ensuring compliance?
A few things. First, I think we need to use a phased, data-driven licensing approach instead of a very rigid cap. If the government decides to cap vehicle license, I think the cap should be adjustable and also based on real operating indicators such as waiting times, cancellation rates, peak hour coverage, and also service availability. A phased rollout would reduce the risk of an affordable service vacuum during transition. And second is to be strict on accountability, but efficient on compliance. The right model is to impose firm obligations on platforms such as due diligence for insurance certification, driver and vehicle compliance, etc., while keeping the compliance process digitalized and standardized. The goal is to be tough on safety and accountability without creating unnecessary friction that drives the supply out of the market. And last and most important is to really treat taxis and ride-hailing as complementary services, but not something that are mutually exclusive. I think Hong Kong should avoid framing this as taxi versus platforms, I think the more practical approach is to accelerate taxi fleet modernization, to expand e-hailing and e-payment functions, and allow better platform integration so that the taxi sector can absorb part of the transition demand. And that is the best way to preserve service quality and continuity while lifting standards across the whole point-to-point market.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights, Ryan. Hope you can join us again soon.
Thank you.
Once again, that was Ryan Ip, Vice President of our Hong Kong Foundation and Executive Director of the Public Policy Institute. For more news, visit hongkongbusiness.hk.